Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to my podcast, Snacks Thoughts. I say again, welcome to my podcast, Snacks Thoughts. Yeah, here we go. Today's topic, the government shutdown 2025. My thoughts on what this means for us. Looking at this situation, this isn't just politics. The shutdown affects our jobs, our communities, and our future. Here's my take on it. Looking at this government shutdown in the year 2025, it occurred because Congress and obviously the president, obviously they're feuding and they're beefing, but they could not reach an agreement by October 1st, which was the deadline for the federal budget. The federal or fiscal budget in the United States of America is normally, every year it's passed about September 30th to October 1st. And by that time, if Congress and the president, if they cannot, reach an agreement, on whatever their issues are, then what happens is that, unfortunately, things in this country, federally anyway, get put on hold. Now, understand something. The president doesn't necessarily reside over the budget. I mean, he obviously is involved in it, but Congress is the one that actually passes the fiscal budget for the United States. Now, how, you might ask, how does this affect Americans in the United States, and who's affected? What's affected, the how, what, where, and why. Well, it's obviously no secret. Anything federal, generally speaking, is going to be affected by the lack of the fiscal budget not being passed. Now, there are certain exceptions to this particular rule. Obviously, for those that are military retirees and to my veterans, pretty much we're going to be safe generally because of Congress has us under, we have a separate pool of money which is under mandatory spending. So that budget is already allotted. So we're in a totally separate pool versus most of the federal budget or deficit. Obviously, you have others that fall under mandatory spending, which is going to be, there's a budget, for like security and stuff like that. Now, obviously, we know that that men and women that are serving in the military and the armed forces right now, they're not going to get paid. So they are affected. So they're kind of affected the same way that federal employees are, and which I really do feel for those that are affected by the lack of passing this budget. I really do, because there's more than meets the eye. Some of these individuals, they have families. And in this particular thing that we call life, on this earth, you are always going to need money. I don't care what country you're in. You will always need it. And money is called currency, in any region, anywhere you go in this world. Without it, basically, you can't buy anything, So I really feel for those, and even for those that, don't have families, that are single. People should get paid what they've earned. And it is not their fault that the president and that Congress and these politicians, that they're having their little spat. And the rest, of us have to suffer because of it. Now, regarding veterans, obviously, VA service, will continue. Their compensation and benefits will continue. VA medical services, whatever it is that veterans were getting, that will continue. Obviously, by myself being a vet, I know personally, so if I needed to use the VA, anything, any prescriptions that I have, anything like that, or medical services, that right there is still available. So I can testify to that, personally, that I'm also a military retiree. So I can attest to that, that we are still receiving, our pay, retirement pay, and also VA compensation and our benefits. So as I know, at this point, we are not affected because we fall under a mandatory spending budget. Now, as I talked about, how does this affect communities? Well, no community can function without resources. Yeah, you have to have resources. And what are some of the ways you go about acquiring those resources? Obviously, money is going to be one of the biggest because people have to have food, they have to have shelter, they have to have clothes, bills have to be paid. Nobody stays anywhere for free. Common sense. And obviously, people have to have food in their stomach. So you need food, clothing, and shelter. That's obvious. But a lot of people in communities, are depending on those individuals that are the breadwinners in their families. And I really do, what I'm saying, it's sad. I'm disappointed, over their foolishness. And I really hope that they get their act together and maybe try to do something like like a stopgap. And like what a stopgap is where Congress, the president and those guys, they can come up with certain policies or funding, that can be set in place. It's kind of like an amendment. So maybe they may not have come to an agreement on the fiscal budget yet, but they can still write up a bill or, a budget, to allocate additional funds to keep the government running while they're still trying to get things sorted out, which that's happened before. And hopefully they will, come to some type of sensible arrangement so that they'll be able to pay federal employees and also military members. It doesn't make any sense, for federal employees not to get paid what they've earned. And also, especially for men and women in the military, and I'm talking about National Guard and Reserve also. They're putting themselves on the line and in harm's way, and they need to be paid. They should definitely be one of the federal employees at the top of the list to make sure you pay them. So it's disappointing that when they have little spats, or disagreements, they're not affected. What happens is the American public, the taxpayers that are affected. And understand something, okay? If people stop spending, if you think this economy is bad now, you're only going to drive it, further. You can drive it into a depression, which I believe we're already in the light stages of a depression right now. But I don't think that the policymakers and obviously the news media really wants to tell the truth. And the Department of Labor statistics, I don't believe they're telling the full truth, what the unemployment rates are, and what really is the goings-ons. But I hope that they can come to some type of sensible decision to get this budget passed, or at least put a stopgap or certain measures in place to allocate funding to keep this government running until they come up with an official number for the fiscal budget, until they get it passed. So that way people can continue with their lives and continue getting paid. Because when you mess with people's money, now you are directly affecting their lives. And this is a domino effect. If these individuals are relying on need their money, which they should be getting, whether they need it or not, they put their hours in and they should be compensated for the particular time that they spend at the job. So if these individuals if these federal employees, military, men and women do not get paid, then they can't go out and pay their bills, which affects somebody else's income. because another person's debt or spending is somebody else's income. So if these employees, they don't get paid, then that means that you have landlords that are not getting paid. Then that means that if the landlords don't get paid, then they can't pay their mortgages. Then the banks don't get paid. They don't get their money. Then the banks can't lend out as much money. So it's a cycle. It's a domino effect. Now, obviously, the politicians, they honestly, I have to believe that probably, I can't say for all of them, but I have to believe a lot of them probably don't even care, about the common person or the taxpayer, because they still get their salary regardless. They're under a different pot of money, and they are allocated under, like, some, I guess if you say, mandatory spending budget, where they get paid regardless. So they're not losing any sleep, and many of them, they are already wealthy. Now, for those that are not wealthy, if you're getting paid, high six figures, 100 and whatever, 80,000, 200,000, I mean, they're still making high salaries, and they still get their money. Their money is coming in the bank, whether it comes in on the 1st or the 15th, while other federal employees and military members basically get zero. I look at some of the TSA employees, and they are some of the lowest paid federal employees for what they have to put up with. They have to deal with people, security. There's a lot of threats that can happen at airports. And for those men and women that work TSA, for them to get a zero balance in their paycheck, and they don't make the highest wages amongst federal employees as it is. They're amongst the lowest paid amongst federal employees. I believe also, my personal opinion, along with the military, I think the fire department, police officers, they should be at the top of the line to get paid. Individuals that work in the, in the medical staff, definitely need to, doctors, nurses, anything in the medical field, they need to be at the top of the line, because these individuals are mission essential. Now, obviously, President Trump and maybe some individuals in the VA or other facilities may not deem them or esteem them necessary or as high as they should, but you need them, because every day in any country, people are always going to need medical care. Every day there's somebody that's going to get sick, or they need medical treatment, and you need to have doctors and nurses that are staffed. Now, obviously, you do have your emergency or essential, what do you call them, essential employees, but your essential employees, they have to work and they don't get paid. Now, granted, the government will give them retroactive back pay, but who wants to go to work and put up with all of those headaches and giving up their time when you're not being appropriately compensated for the time out of your life that you're giving up? It's not fair, but they're affecting people's quality of life by doing this. Now, fortunately for some people, they do have, enough savings, and they have other investments, and they have other income coming in, but that's not everybody. Everybody's not in that situation. So for those individuals that don't have another spouse, have a spouse, a partner, that's working, bringing in money coming in, or they don't have additional incomes, or they don't have enough in savings, you're doing a lot of damage to these individuals and their families, to their lives, and you're putting a lot of unnecessary stress. Then what I want to throw in is, 100 federal employees resigning in one day, and he's considering, instead of having them furloughed, permanently firing them. There's just some things that's not right. Those individuals, they worked hard in their careers, and it's not fair for them, after they've put in all of that hard work. And some of these I'm talking about some of these are some really good people. And because you cannot reach an agreement with Congress, you're going to just slash and cut a whole bunch of federal employees. That's not right. That's to me, that seems like a serious abuse of power. And I don't think that's right. In my personal opinion, in the event something like that should happen, and if there are federal employees say that they're not close to retirement and they want to continue working in the federal government, why should they be forced out? Especially if they have good records and they're doing an excellent job. Why should they have to be fired from their jobs because of someone else's hissy fit with other politicians who at this time they are not getting the job done for the American people? We basically are paying our tax dollars. Those of us that are affected and aren't affected, we're paying our tax dollars for them to be up there in political office and act like clowns. American people don't have time for this. There is enough going on in our society and in our country right now. Then you have to take a look at there were other industries that are affected. If people can't buy their groceries and stuff, you got farmers. Then you have federal contractors. And even on the civilian side, you have businesses that do rely on federal dollars, and also federal employees and military's purchasing power. So you're causing a domino effect while they are standing in the corner, standing on different sides of the room, and the country is suffering and falling apart. So I really hope, I pray, that they get it together. Now for those federal employees and military members that may need to, still get their paycheck, or while they're waiting, to get retroactive back pay, if that should happen. I know there are some credit unions, and I think maybe some banks that they will issue out, temporary loans. I think it's Navy Federal is one of them that will issue out a loan for military members. I think it's federal employees too, to loan them their paycheck, and then at 0% interest, and then the military members and federal employees can turn around and pay them back. I think USAA may do that also, but I think a lot of credit unions and banks that are closely associated and that do business for the military and federal government, I think some of them are offering certain specialized loan programs, so that way it can tide people over, for those that may need it. Obviously, I understand people have different financial situations, but when you're talking about messing with people's money, that's a very serious thing now, because what you're doing, you're basically you're pulling the rug from under people's feet from something that they should have been able to rely on. Basically, what you're doing, you're making households unstable. And the one thing you don't want to do is fool with people's money and put individuals in a desperate situation, because when people become afraid, fearful, and they become desperate, then you don't never know what they're liable to do. And to these politicians, to these all the way up to the Oval Office, to say, you got to look. Oh man, I don't know if I even should say this, but you have to take a look at what our president of the United States, what he went through just to get into the Oval Office. And if people are willing to take maybe chances, at firing, to keep a candidate from becoming the president of the United States, what can possibly happen if you begin to mess with people's money and they get desperate and they can't feed their families and pay their bills? You got to think about that. And in this country, in America, there are individuals in this country that they have artillery, and we got some people in this country that they ain't afraid to use it, if their stress level gets too high. And I'm not speaking any threat or nothing like that, not at all. And I never want that. But these politicians, all the way up to the Oval Office, they have to think about more than just their bubble. See, they live in a bubble because many of them are rich and wealthy, so they're not affected. They get to go home to their families, whereas those that have to more or less work for a living, and they got to really grind it and get it out the mud. They putting something on the line. Whereas them politicians, they get to hobnob, go to their fancy dinners and all other stuff and whatever, taking their private jets, you know what I'm saying? A good portion of them are wealthy. A good portion. And if those that aren't wealthy, if they remain in the game, eventually they will become wealthy. So, they have, wealth, they have stability. Their families are not affected, but they don't think about the damage that they're doing and the domino effect that their decisions have on other people's families. Another thing I could think about is, what about the SNAP EBT benefits? What about single parent households, that have to feed their kids? Their decisions, these are decisions that are affected. They're not worried about looking their children in the face, and their children don't have to worry where their next meal is coming from. And in this country, in the United States of America, I said this is a great country, but it has a lot to be desired. And I know that politicians are crooked at every level. And they do foolish things and stupid things that affect the masses, but they don't think about it because some of them, and many of them, they can be selfish. Flat out, they can be selfish, but they're not thinking about. And like I said, the United States has got we got at least something like 350 million people in this country, 350 or maybe 338 million. That's a lot of people. And whatever portion of that is affected by this federal government, you don't want to get that many people upset. I mean, if you get as many upset as what happens if you get as many as, say, 50,000 to a couple of 100,000 Americans upset, that are armed, and I'm not trying to be funny, but a lot of times these politicians, they don't get it, until it starts affecting them. I'm not trying to be cold or funny, and I don't like to really use names, but look at what happened with Congresswoman Pelosi. With her, she pissed some people off, and it should never come to that. But there were some things that they believe that her and her husband did, getting insider tips on the stock market, where they made a whole bunch of money, but they make the decisions that that can cripple other people's, households and economies while they stay getting fat. Now, I can't prove it, but that's what I heard. But then look what happens, because of her actions and decisions, they were looking for her, but they got her husband instead, going upside, his head, trying to, crack skulls open. And they wanted her, but they got him instead, and then she wake up and she get the message then, when it came to her doorstep, and I'm, like I said, I'm not, thank God I'm not affected, but I understand from, other people's perspective, which a lot of times some of these politicians, they just, they don't care, or they don't look outside their bubble. So they're not thinking, about their decisions, how it affects others, and many times, unfortunately, they're not held accountable like they should be. There should be accountability for our leaders and people that hold these offices. They have to learn to think about more than just themselves. But yeah, SNAP, EBTs. What about let me see, Social Security? I don't know if they're under. Does Congress have them under mandatory spending or separate? I have to look and check into that. I think Social Security, they still receive their money, But my point is this, it should never have come to this point in the first place. You have, a lot of people out there that are going to suffer because of this. And this spills over even on the private sector, because a lot of the private sector and federal, many times they go hand in hand. So if the federal, which is supposed to be more stable, when they can't hold up, the government can't hold up their end, then normally the private sector, that means that you're going to experience even more layoffs. The private sector is already taking a beating. But normally it happens to the private sector first, then it begins to happen to the government. Now, when you get both are taking a beating, when you get both taking a beating, that tells you that we in trouble. We're in trouble. What does it mean for our future? It's instability. It's not good. It's for any country, but especially for a country as large as ours. We cannot afford to be unstable. We can't afford it. We can't. But that's just my thoughts on it. But hopefully they put in some type of stopgap, and maybe they can, because the government, I don't care what they say, they always have other discretionary funds. Trust me, when they want to dip their hands into Social Security and to other pots of money, which they've done, they can take those funds and they allocate it for other areas, even though they shouldn't. But the government is always have additional, pots of money that they can pull from in an emergency in order to keep this country afloat while they figure out, what they're going to do and hash out their differences. It's happened before. But my point is that when people are facing financial crisis and it becomes a life crisis, it's never good or funny to mess with anybody's money. There's nothing good about that. And it should never come to that point, because now you are messing with people's lives, and that's a very serious thing. That's a very serious thing. But hopefully they get it together. Other than that, this country is in some serious trouble. We already have markets and bubbles that are already bursting. But hopefully, for the men and women that are working for the federal government, to include the military, firefighters, police officers, hopefully they get this resolved real soon, and hopefully there'll be credit unions, banks, and they can come out with other resources to sustain those individuals and families that may need just some temporary funding for the time being. But that's my thoughts, guys. That's all I have on this one. But yes, the government shutdown 2025. This was my thoughts and what this could potentially mean for us. United States can't afford any instability. We can't afford it. But that's all I have, guys. And the name of this podcast is Snacks Thoughts. SNAKZTHOUGHTS. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Radio Sound, PBM, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and a host of other social media outlets. Also, I have the 5 best weight loss products. So please go to my link, which will be in the description, and purchase the weight loss products. Next to God, the next best thing you have is your health. And you only get one life and you get one body. So take care of your health. Take care of it. And share the link and the products with others so that they can take care of their health also. Also, I have my YouTube channel, Eric Broadus YouTube, EricBroadus YouTube, or ericbroadusyoutube.com. So please smash the bell to become a subscriber. Turn on all notifications to receive future videos and podcasts. Hit the like button and unlike button to like the videos. Either way, leave a comment. Love to dialogue with you. And also on this Snacks Thoughts podcast, leave a comment. Love to dialogue with you and find out, what do you think about this government shutdown and what it's going to mean for us. And lastly, I have my Snacks 123 channel on Rumble. So please join me over there. Subscribe, hit the like or unlike button to like the videos, and either way, leave a comment. I'd love to hear what say you about this 2025 government shutdown and the effects on us. That's all I have on this one, guys. Peace out. Catch you on the next one. Later.